on the stage, I've got the gentleman who started the ball rolling. So let me introduce them. His Excellency Olusegun Obasanjo, the former President of the Republic of Nigeria. Sir, welcome.
Thank you.
Professor Chukwuma Soludo, first Chairman of AFC and former Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Sir, welcome. And Tony Elumelu, Chairman, Heirs Holdings Limited. Thank you, sir. Welcome, and one of the pioneers of the bank as well. Now, often in Africa, when you look around, even if you think about going back to school, most of our history books are written by you-know-who. And yet, we've got the people, in many cases, who have written the history, but is unwritten, if you understand what I mean. And here, I think we've got a gentleman who not only dreamt, but actually went on to write African history. And I'm very, very glad about this opportunity to be able to sit down with H.E. Obasanjo to talk about a dream that became a reality. Mr. President, as you sit there, celebrating 10 years of the African Finance Corporation, tell me how you feel.
Well, how can you feel when you are part of a dream? And of course, as a human being, you must never stop to dream. But most dreams never come to fulfillment. But when you are part of a dream that comes to fulfillment, and you look back in 10 years, and a seed that you casually planted, because for me it was casually planted, and then it became a big tree, celebrating not only in Nigeria, but it's having effect in other countries in Africa. It's known worldwide, and is growing. Then you cannot but feel satisfied, and not just feel satisfied. And I think, as the Vice President said in his statement, this is a dream dreamt by Africans, conceived by Africans, nurtured by Africans, delivered by Africans, executed by Africans, and sustained by Africans. So, so for me, it means we can do it. As Chukwuma Soludo, well, I don't call him Charles. Because, one day he came to me and said, I said, Charles, look, you don't have any African name. He said, I'm Chukwuma. I said, from today you are Chukwuma. Because I used to be something else that I don't like to mention here, but as he rightly said last night, he said 22 minutes talk with me. Now, what he did not say is that those 22 minutes talks were many talks. Some take less than 22 minutes, some take more than 22 minutes, which made us working together to achieve what we were able to achieve. Now, but what was important for me was that here was a man who has ability, who has understanding, knowledge, who has experience, who has exposure, and who does not have partisan interest. He has national, or if you like, African, or even if you like, global interest. Sure. So he brings these things, And he said to last night that, well, I listen. And whether some people don't believe it, I am a good listener. But I am also an impatient listener. I'm a good listener. I am an impatient listener. Because if you are talking to me and you are not making point, I switch off. Now, if you are making point, I ask you a couple of questions and I see that we are on the same wavelength, and I say, well, go on, and go on. And then I will be following as you go on to make sure that what we agree is what we are doing. And if you are deviating, I will call you to order. Now, that was my job as the leader. I am supposed to lead. But I'm supposed also to get all points of view, all ideas together, and then decide which way we go. So if you are deviating, I call you to order. On one or two occasions, I had to call him to order.
Mr. President, I am now calling you to order. This is my platform. One more question before I move on. So 10 years on, you sound satisfied. But is this the vision that you had when you set out? And you can be frank with me. We're amongst friends here.
I will be frank with you. And again, Chukwuma hasn't been fair to himself. He made it look as if I was doing it all. Now, that's far from the truth, or from the true position. He will come at times and bring ideas. We will talk. In some ideas that have become big thing and affected our economy, we were walking along and talking about it. Some we sat down, we will sit in front of me, we talk about it. I think one or two I throw off with a wave of hand. But really, he is a man of ideas, and I will say that. Because the point he came to make is that in Nigeria, we are not short of men and women of ideas. Men and women of character, men and women of integrity. Mind you, there are also dubious men and women all around. Now, the point is that we have to identify those men and women of ideas, men and women of ability, men and women of integrity, men and women who are genuinely patriotic about Nigeria, and indeed men and women who are not only nationalists but pan-Africanists. We need them, and we must have them to move Nigeria forward and indeed to move Africa forward. We have them. The point is, how do we identify them? And when we identify them, how do we make use of them? And when we make use of them, how do we lead them? Sure. They must be led.
As well. I'm going to stick to Professor Soludo. I'm not going to go to Nkrumah. When you sit there as well, 10 years on, I think this is as much your baby as it is the baby of His Excellency. Do you see what you envisioned from those days 11 years ago, or that 12th of January meeting that you were talking about last night?
One point before I go on, and that is to say to Mr. President, you said sometimes you're very impatient. Let me say two things that stand out as an introduction. We need leadership. And that's one of the, I'm adding to the third of the two elements added by the Minister of Uganda, that peace and integration, and I will add leadership. That's the third to complete the tripod for Africa to move forward. And the second is to assure Mr. President, from my own experience, you were such a great listener. Maybe that's an experience some of us, I could also see Obi and the audience.
There's a sister of yours here who don't believe it. Obi probably thinks that I don't listen to her at all.
But let me come back to your question, and that is that For me, as I said last night, it was quite an emotional moment to see a dream some 10 years plus ago that were, conceived of an idea. You go to the president, whom I acknowledge profusely, for the belief. You come and share the ideas with him, and he says, taps you and says, go ahead. And the rest is history. And for me, it's quite an emotional moment. But let me say the idea of the AFC, answering your question directly in terms of whether we are where we thought it should. I will say right away, we are there, but the road ahead is still long. The context, and let me put two statistics. The entire sub-Saharan Africa is just the size of Belgium in economic terms. You can imagine Belgium being divided into 54 isolated countries. Second is that several studies have shown that about 40% of non-land private wealth, Africa's wealth, happen to be outside of Africa. And the missing link, really, is creating the kind of platforms to unleash African capital, to be able to move across borders, to mobilize African capital. Because in my view, it's only the African capital that can form the fulcrum. If the African capital doesn't move, it is the domestic capital that will say to the foreign capital, here is the place to make money for it to come. And so AFC was a dream to provide that kind of platform to mobilize African capital and to move across borders where African capital infrastructure can become, as the missing link, begin to fill in the missing dots in terms of linking this small, or if you might call it, the disarticulated Belgium, as it were. AFC was supposed to fill that void. And today, that experiment seems to have been working extremely well. You know, with 1.2, 1.1 billion in capital, the last Eurobond they issued, I understand, 750 million, but then Asian and American investors, wanted more than 4 billion or something in terms of subscriptions and so on. So is the African capital leading the way, and the rest of the world coming? And also a platform for much of the Africa's capital wealth, 40% of it abroad, to begin to come home to create a new Africa.
Sure. The example you give about Belgium, I think, is chastening, because Belgium is 11 million people.
Yeah.
Africa is 1 billion people. Need we say more? Tony, you were the first chairman of the Risk and Investment Committee. You were there for 9 years. Now, when you look back on this child, now 10 years old, has this child been boisterous? Has this child been taking the risk as you would expect from a child? How do you see it?
I think since yesterday we've spoken about the vision of this great man, this great leader that history will forever remember for being very courageous to give support to initiatives. Today, let me turn to management, because one thing to have great ideas and that is for great ideas to come true. I'd like to say that as chairman of BRIC, founding or pioneer chairman of BRIC, for about 9 years, 10 years, I interacted very closely with management, and I think that AFC has got a world-class leadership, management leadership. We have seen great seeds planted, using the words of the acting president, but how you nurture the tree or the seed when it germinates is more important. It's as important as the idea and the plant sowing of it. We at AFC, I say we, after 19 years, you've got to change that. I've seen how management has worked out. Look at the rating of AFC. You know, AAA rating, an African institution domiciled here in Nigeria. And if you listen to what Professor Soludo said about the Euro bond, massively oversubscribed, being able to attract best talent, human capital from across the world. AFC is populated, staff people from across the world, not even Africa alone. We have board members from the US, people from Dubai, India, and co, serving as a part of management team. Two things strike me. If I assess the leadership of AFC, I'll talk about two things. One is the governance standard and practices at AFC.
Yeah.
You know, it's something, it's world class. And sitting there, I served on the governance committee and also risk, and I like how things are done at AFC. And no wonder they continue to get the kind of rating it gets today.
It does give you a lot of satisfaction, the AAA rating, doesn't it?
No,
I mean, how difficult was that to attain that?
People know. To start with, many African countries don't have and not near that level of rating, and AFC has. So it's like a supranational institution. But I want to come back to the issue again about the second point about this leadership. Because, anyway, second point is, not long ago, the previous session, we were talking about intra-Africa trade. And I heard some reasons given for why we have poor state of intra-Africa trade. I believe that AFC is leading to address that, and AFC is also leading to address of power. Why did I say this? Intra-Africa trade, to a large extent, is influenced by two things, or will be influenced by two things. Infrastructure. The way Africa is wired by our transportation infrastructure, there'll be a limit to how much we can trade intra-Africa. So to trade intra-Africa, we need to start from the colonial transportation system we had, which structured the movement of commodities from the hinterland straight to the ports for export outside the shores of Africa. And AFC is leading. In the first few years, they talked about ports, trying to develop ports, trying to show interest in railways, interest even in intra-Africa transportation. This is the kind of infrastructure we need to develop the continent. AFC is playing a role there. And as someone who has served on risk committee, I see this and I'm happy about it. AFC also, in the area of power, they realize that we need power to power Africa out of poverty.
Absolutely.
And AFC has done gas to power support. They've done the renewables in the area of power.
Sure.
And they just need more encouragement. So I see it, looking back, the night I was called, one night I got a call about AFC. I said, yes, let's support it and get in United Bank of Africa. I think after Central Bank, United Bank of Africa is the next single largest investor there. All of the support we give to AFC, personal support, investment capital support, we're happy today that the institution is being well run and is in good care of capable leadership. So I say to them, as we celebrate the pioneers, directors, pioneer or divisioners, it's also good to say well done to people who have helped the vision, who have sustained the vision.
Vision for the next 10 years. What would you like it to be? What would you like to see?
10 years from now?
You'll be here.
Amen. 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 Amen.
Yes, if you say so. but on a very serious note, if we look at what AFC had done in 10 years, despite the rocky or rough beginning because of lack of understanding by leaders that came later. And if we also look at the instability and uncertainty that is there in the world beyond us, if the three things that we have agreed are very necessary for our country, for our continent, are there: peace, integration, and leadership. And when I talk of leadership, I'm not talking of just political leadership. I'm talking of leadership at all levels, because AFC would not have got to where it has got to in 10 years if, after Chukwuma and I have thought about it and we have said, I have said go on, he has tried to go on, and we do not have those who followed it through, we would not have got here. If all these go well, I see an AFC that in the next 10 years will have tripled or quadrupled its investment.
Public target.
Its investment in infrastructure in Africa. I see an AFC that will become a household name everywhere in Africa. I see an AFC that will be competing, or if you like, complementing the World Bank equivalent, the IFC, or if not, overtaking for Africa. You see, this question of believing in ourselves, I think is very, very important. I am an incurable optimist about Africa and about my country, Nigeria. I don't know about you. There are many things that are wrong, many. But while we are thinking about those things that are wrong, we should also commend ourselves about things that are right. At one time, I decided to give a lecture in the US, and the topic of my lecture is what is right about Africa. And when I started thinking about it, I found a number of things right about Africa, which we don't even, we take for granted. And I remember I took about 40 young and up-and-coming African leaders to Singapore some years back. And Lee Kuan Yew, he hasn't written his book From Third World to the First World. We wanted him to tell us. And he stayed with us for 2 days. And during the period of the interaction, we asked him, the young African leaders asked him, what is the magic? And Lee Kuan Yew said, look, there's no magic. We did a few things right, and we continue to do them right. we in Africa have done a few things right.
Yes.
Part of our problem is that we do not continue to do them right. Now, let me take here in Nigeria. I'm coming to your question. I've answered part of it.
You will have less than a minute. I'm calling you to order.
Yes. Look, here in Nigeria, we did UPE right, universal primary education. Education is fundamental for our development. But do we continue to do it right? No. After we failed to continue to do UPE right, we did UBE right, universal basic education. But do we continue to do it right? No. We did primary health right. But do we continue to do it right? No. Now we talk about rice. We want to be self-sufficient in rice. In 1979, Nigeria was self-sufficient in rice production. What happened? The administration that came in decided that they will form a presidential committee for importation of rice, not for production of rice, for importation of rice, part of what we did not do right.
I've given you alone 30 seconds.
Now, you get your turn. I will take your 30 seconds. But let me tell you the story of that importation of rice. Now, one of the political party, the ruling political party, Baron, got license for importation of rice. And he went to America to get his rice imported. After he had letter of credit had been opened and all that, you in central bank, you know what letter of credit is all about. I don't know. He went back to the suppliers. He said they should ask for $5 million extra. And they did. They did. When the rice had, all the thing had been done, he went back, he said, look, give me the $5 million I ask you to add. And they said, no, we won't give you $5 million. You didn't take any risk. We took the risk. We could jolly well have lost everything. So we give you $1 million. So it became a dispute. And our deputy permanent representative at the UN, who comes from the same town as the ruling party politician, decided to intervene. He called the suppliers, and they came with our Nigerian prince. Actually, he was a prince. And the ambassador then sat down and said, we will not tolerate Nigerians being cheated. And the American said, hey, Mr. Ambassador, we don't understand what you are saying. Now, maybe you don't know the story. The story is this. They told the story. And the ambassador said he felt like digging the ground and sinking in it, because he did not know that his own prince, his own leader, his own political leader has actually done such shameful thing. Now, the end result of that is that Nigeria ceased to be self-sufficient in rice production, because those who were producing rice, including one of my cousins, who had said, look, you lazy man, go on producing rice, they were discouraged from producing rice because they produced rice that they could not sell. And we didn't do that right. So in 10 years' time, if we continue, if AFC continues to do right, as it's doing now, it will be a big umbrella, not only for Nigeria, but for Africa, as far as
One final thought, Prof.
Lost in thought.
Now, this time we don't want Soludo solution.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Because that worked in the university. It didn't work for you in politics.
Very briefly.
I think the next one, once you come and say, go ahead, and it will work.
Baba, once you say go ahead.
Let me, just
Very briefly,
a quick footnote to that. It's just an addition to what he has said. In 10 years' time, where do we say? I am an incurable optimist about Africa's future. In 2000, I was a co-author of a book published by the World Bank entitled, Can Africa Claim the 21st Century? And the answer to that question and where Africa is relative to where it needs to be, it's not only the ideas that make us not only incurable optimists, but also impatient. And I want to think that AFC, given the track record so far, as I said last night, a vision that people said couldn't be done. It couldn't be done in a year, was done in a year and delivered. In 10 years, we've seen where we've gone from all the litany of how it couldn't be done to where we are today. That in 10 years' time, I see an AFC with membership. I'm talking about country membership, because now you have about 14 or so country members, is it? In 10 years, I want to envision an AFC with the 54 African countries as member nations. That's in the first place. In 10 years, we also want to say, and I will plead with our friends at the central bank, the investment of the central bank was held in trust for other African investors. It is not for central bank to remain there. That the central bank will graciously sell off those
unload.
Offload. Actually, that was a presidential directive by his successor that in 5 years should sell off, to others. No more than 5% to ensure a very effective corporate governance of that institution. And with a stronger corporate governance, we are sure then that the institution is built to last. I don't see a limit to what it could be. Today, the free funds, the pension funds, the sovereign wealth fund, and even the reserves of central banks all over the world, if you pull them, you are looking in the range of $12, $15 trillion out there. Institutional investors are awash with money. In other words, I'm making the point that it's not surprising that the Eurobond got oversubscribed. We're looking for a time when it could become, maybe you need 4 billion, the next time you could get 40 billion.
Sure.
That's getting closer then to Africa's infrastructure need. Depending on who does the numbers, the requirement is anything between 60 to 120 billion per annum, as the case may be, different estimates. I see AFC, because I don't see a limit in terms of what is possible, given Africa's need and potentials and the resources out there. AFC can be just about anything for Africa if we put our minds to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Tony, you want to comment briefly?
When I was called that night, I think Professor Soludo left Baba and called me on the phone late that night to talk about AFC. And he said to me, I need you, Aliko Dangote. And by the way, I hope we recognize later your Aderonoko because one.
No, we did. We did all the members.
Yeah, you did last night. You did last night.
Yeah. You know, that we want to work together to build an African IFC for the world, part of Africa. And it sounded so exciting, so audacious, inspiring, and that mobilized most of us and we put in our best. So looking 10 years hence and even beyond, I want to see AFC assume, you know, those days when we had time to read, I read this book, The House of Morgan. It's a very voluminous book about the J.P. Morgan and co., how they all started. And this great American that left America and came to the UK, London, Pinochet, but I can't remember his first name again. He was there mobilizing capital to build rails in America. And the foresight they had then helped in building the foundation for today's America. I'd like to see AFC see itself more in this light going forward. The commodity crisis has demonstrated the fact that we need to attract more capital into Africa. And there's so much global capital looking for destination. We need to make Africa a destination. So I need AFC to play two roles. One, help to bring the much needed capital from the rest of the world into Africa, and they're on the right track, but we're talking of 750 million euros, which talk a lot more in billions time to come. And two, begin to create an advocacy arm that will help to engage the African government, because infrastructure does not do well where government does not play a critical role. And for AFC to succeed in this drive for helping to improve infrastructure in Africa, be it power, rails, etc., we need to get the public sector doing the right thing. So bring capital to Africa, more capital to Africa, help, as Soludo said, even mobilize African capital outside of Africa, bring it back, but equally important, engage with our political leaders to create the right environment that will enable this capital, when you bring it in, to stay in Africa. That is what I want to see AFC play going forward.
Thank you for sitting for a moment, because, as you said, AFC prides itself in taking what we call an African-centric approach. And we're celebrating, as you so beautifully put it, 10 years of existence. It wasn't easy to get here, but we're here. So the question really comes to mind, how will AFC impact in the next 10 years? Well, definitely it will be part of the infrastructure gap, plugging that gap. So please, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for a presentation on the speech of the CEO and President of AFC, Mr. Andrew Alli.
Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, members of the board of AFC, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. Africa needs to find ways of enabling infrastructure development if it is to reach its fullest economic potential. If we are to achieve this, the public and private sectors will need to work in unison. I am Andrew Alli, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Africa Finance Corporation, AFC. It's my privilege to welcome you today to AFC Live 2017, the second edition of our Infrastructure Investment Summit. 2017 marks AFC's 10th anniversary. This summit is designed to look back over the last decade, to assess the lessons we've learned, the progress we've made, and collectively to plan for the future. We believe that we must share our experiences, intensify our efforts, and focus on practical solutions that we can scale up to address the enormous challenge but also the major opportunity that investment in African infrastructure represents. To set the scene and hopefully create structure for the debate, I want to walk you through a short summary of the AFC story and how we see Africa's infrastructure sector evolving. When AFC was established in 2007, Africa was experiencing GDP growth rates consistently in excess of 5% per annum. And investor interest in the continent was strong. The so-called Africa Rising story was just gathering momentum, but central to the debate about the sustainability of growth even then was the infrastructure deficit and how to bridge it. That debate remains as relevant today as it did then. The scale of the challenge remains, but the environment within which we are operating has changed, and not necessarily for the better. Global economic conditions since 2015, when commodity prices started to fall, have served to demonstrate the ongoing vulnerability of many African economies. This is particularly the case for those that are still overly reliant on commodity exports for government revenues. Our host country, Nigeria, along with Angola, Zambia, Mozambique, and many other countries have all experienced significant economic stress, while Africa's average growth rate in 2016 declined to 1.6%, according to the IMF. A consequence of this is volatility in government revenues, and thus a reduced ability to spend on infrastructure and other social programs. Prior to now, many African countries have not done enough to create an enabling environment or to make investments that foster the growth of diversified economies. This is exacerbated by the fact that top-line GDP growth did not always translate into inclusive socio-economic development. As a result, the infrastructure challenge that we set out to address in 2007 might be even more important now than it was then. The evidence is clear to everyone. In order to escape the boom and bust of the commodity cycle, African governments must refocus on addressing the impediments to sustainable and inclusive domestic growth. At the heart of this is addressing the infrastructure deficit. Now, despite some early challenges, AFC is a formidable Pan-African corporation with a balance sheet to raise financing on a project-by-project basis. AFC has contributed to the elevation of African infrastructure as an asset class in and of itself. As a direct result, more industry players have entered the market than was the case at our inception in 2007. I want to share some of the successes we have been able to achieve in our decade of operations and to give you an insight into our thinking for the future. I hope this can help shape the discussions that we have throughout the day. When AFC was established, we had assets of 1.1 billion US dollars. By the end of 2016, we had grown that to 3.4 billion US dollars and delivered record annual profits to our shareholders of $115 million. We have continued to progressively grow our asset base and to deliver improved profitability since our inception. We are targeting an asset base of $5 billion in total in the medium term, which means in about 3 years. This financial stability and growth is a fundamental part of our success, which I believe has been built on a foundation of 3 pillars. The first is a very strong capital base and extremely supportive shareholders. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our shareholders, from our largest, which is the Central Bank of Nigeria, down to our smallest, which are some individuals. Second, a strong and committed team. We have deliberately focused on recruiting the best talents, globally exposed, but with a commitment to Africa's growth and development. And everything that I'm standing on stage today celebrating is really a result of the AFC team and very little to do with me. So I would like to very much thank them, and I would be grateful if you could give them a round of applause. And last, but by no means least, and this I think is what some of the august panelists have spoken about, a very strong corporate governance structure developed to world-class standards. And again, I would like to thank all of our board members, past, present, and indeed future, for all the advice and input and the contribution that you've made to the corporation. Even when you turn down projects and proposals we make, I think it's always, it's very often proved to be that you were right and we were wrong as management, and we very much acknowledge that. Since we last convened AFC Live in 2014, we have invested over $2.5 billion in projects in various countries across Africa, including Guinea-Conakry, Gabon, Rwanda, Cameroon, and of course, Nigeria. We've raised over $3.5 billion in capital from a range of sources, including very recently tapping the Eurobond market with a $500 million issuance, and launching the first sukuk for $150 million issued by an African supranational entity, which we did earlier this year. We've expanded our geographic footprint with 14 member countries now, and as has been mentioned, we've invested over $4 billion over the life of the corporation in projects in about 30 markets. We've established our first platform company focused on the power sector in partnership with Harith General Partners, a model I'll talk about a bit later. We've continued to focus on project development as a core activity. One of the areas we have chosen to devote special attention to. In 2016, we launched the Africa Infrastructure Developers Association, called AFIDA, to help to bring this together. We've also, and this comes to maybe one of the last points that I think Tony was saying, diversified and strengthened our advisory practice to provide advisory services to companies, institutions, and governments that are looking to optimize their infrastructure resources. We've been appointed and have acted and are acting on mandates in Nigeria, Rwanda, and Djibouti. At AFC, we believe that our core role comes at the earlier stage of project conception and development. While international capital will follow and may be crucial in bridging the investment gap, private capital, domestic or international, will not come to African infrastructure projects if Africa does not focus on the development of bankable and sustainable projects. By focusing on supporting project development and using our local knowledge and sector expertise to identify and mitigate risks, AFC comes into transactions at an earlier stage than many investors. We believe one of our principal roles is to accelerate the number of viable, bankable projects across the continent, creating the market for other forms of capital to follow, and ultimately bridging the investment divide that currently exists. I'm delighted that today the project development space in Africa is considerably more vibrant than when we started, as was shown in the debate that was held on the side of this event yesterday. We're no longer alone in this. We have much more competition and many more sources of capital, and that can only be healthy for the whole continent. Going forward, we recognize that we must bring this decade of experience and the partnerships and friendships we have formed with those of you in this room to accelerate and deepen the interventions that we can deliver. At AFC, we're particularly interested in two key areas. The first is the need to focus attention on companies that can deliver scale across multiple markets in our target sectors. We want them to be more catalytic. our joint venture with Harith General Partners, is an example of this in the power sector. By combining the assets of the two investors, we've created a company with over 1,500 megawatts of power capacity either installed or under construction, and which will provide power to 30 million Africans in 5 countries. The joint venture has the capacity to execute more and larger projects and to attract significant levels of capital. This is a model we believe can work across our target sectors, and we'll be focusing on these scalable investments and structures over the coming years. The second area is currency, which was spoken about before. If the commodity price issues of 2015 and 16 have taught us anything, it is that dollar-denominated financing in emerging markets creates risk, which acts as a major obstacle to financing projects. We believe that much more must be done to develop local currency financing solutions. Longer-term and cheaper capital needs to be available domestically. Clearly, we cannot deliver this on our own, but it is fundamental and something that we should all be working together to address. We'll be making this a core focus over the next few years. Finally, I want to conclude by saying that while the levels of investment, financial returns, a number of deals that AFC has done are important measures of our success as an institution, they are nothing if we're not delivering tangible benefits. I'm proud that our investments, and you'll see many of them highlighted through the course of today, are delivering real change on the continent, whether we're increasing the power output of generation companies in Nigeria, building the roads that people use for trade in southern Africa, or processing natural resources into value-added products for African consumers. The legacy that AFC leaves and will leave behind is not only the physical structures of roads, power and manufacturing plants, oil and gas processing facilities, but also the human capacity it develops and is developing, the socio-economic change it has driven and in some instances led, the communities it has enriched, the economies it has contributed to through direct and indirect development, the partnerships, the footprints it has made across the continent, and above all, the social dividend it has given back to civil society across this continent we call Africa. Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the conference and look forward to many more years of fruitful collaboration.